Hello, and welcome to the podcast on the history of Georgian art. Before we move on to the actual subject and the reasons why I decided to run this podcast, let me introduce myself first. I am Tamar Gogwadze from Georgia. I did my first master's on art history at Tbilisi State Academy of Arts. Then I went to the United Kingdom to study theology. So I did my second master's in pastoral theology in Cambridge, followed by my PhD at the University of Durham. My interest in theology is largely derived from my passion for art, which ultimately determined the scope of my research area, which is divine origins of human artistic creativity. The reason why I decided to run this podcast is that I feel like I owe my love for art to the culture I was born into. And I believe many Georgians probably share my sentiment. Georgia has a very, very long history and long tradition of artistic expression. If you are listening to our podcast, it means logically that you are interested in Georgia and in Georgian art. Otherwise, you would not be just listening to me. Georgia has attracted wider public interest worldwide recently due to its strive and struggle for European integration. In case if you do not know where Georgia is, unfortunately, I don't have a map to show you, but I can tell you that it is located between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. It has Caucasian mountains to the north, which separates it from Russia, and it borders Armenia and Azerbaijan to the south. The history of Georgia goes back to the dawn of human history. We are very, very proud of the fact that we had bones found here in this territory, which are dated back to many million years ago. So it kind of proves that there were first Europeans living in this land. This land had different political orders even before the kingdoms of Colchis and Iberia emerged in the first millennium. And you probably know about these kingdoms thanks to the Greek and Roman writers. In Georgian, we call Sakartvelo our country, which means the place where Georgians or Kartvelis live. In spite of its modest size, Georgia has splendid landscapes, really, really beautiful. Coastal lowlands along with alpine meadows and high mountains, glaciers. No wonder that it attracted foreign conquerors and our neighbors, powerful neighbors, to conquer the country throughout the ages. Georgia has been the target for invaders such as Persians, Arabs, Mongols, Ottomans. They all brought in their own imprint and left their own imprint on Georgian culture. However, it's curious to see, and I promise I will show you, how Georgian masters managed to transform those influences into the elements enriching our own unique style, which basically hardly has a similarity anywhere else. Apart from invaders and being invaded, Georgia owes to its successful episodes to our great kings and public figures. Being the edge of empires such as Rome and later Byzantium, Georgia familiarized itself with Oriental cultures, which probably explains why the apostles Saint Andrew the first called Simon of Canaan and Messiah passed through Georgia when they preached the word of God. However, the ultimate conversion of the country is linked with the name of Saint Nino, a 12-year-old girl from Cappadocia who walked all the way from Jerusalem on foot. She had no intention to convert the country. Her only intention was to see the place where the gospel was preached, but nevertheless people there still worshipped idols. That was her initial plan, according to the records, to the historical sources. So when she arrived to Georgia, she met, according to this legend, she met Queen Nana and healed her from some terminal illness. Then, after converting Queen Nana, King Miriam followed, and ultimately the whole country was converted. The priests were brought from Byzantium to baptize the masses of people. After the conversion of this country, it's likely that we had Byzantine masters here teaching Georgians how to build the churches. Being a Christian country and being always the target of invasions from our Muslim neighbors was not an easy life for Georgia, and it ended up in the end in a very, very difficult situation when our King Erekle in the end of the 18th century had no other choice other than seek a Christian ally in the neighborhood. So he addressed Russia and sought Russia's protection. As a response, in 1801, Russia annexed Georgia, which was very unfortunate for the Georgian art too, because our church, Georgian church, this autocephaly was abolished, and the exarchs, I'm sorry, I have to. And the Russian exarchs were appointed. They ordered to whitewash the mural paintings in our churches. Then the Tsarist regime was replaced by the Soviet one, which was even worse and even more difficult. After liberation, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Georgia gained its independence. And since then, we began to seek the roots of our true, authentic identity. And I do believe that it is actually artistic expression which shows the best what the nation is truly like. Therefore, I decided to run this podcast because I realized that it may be helpful for foreigners to discern what Georgia is really like if you look through its art and its artistic expression. Now let's go through the way Georgian art developed from the beginning throughout the centuries. Although we cannot really pretend what was really happening in the first and third millennia BC, because it's very difficult to know much about it due to the lack of historical sources. However, the archaeological excavations which take place all over our country can serve as historical records themselves. They can actually create history. There is hardly a place in Georgia where the soil does not preserve the remains of ancient civilization. The scholars believe that the first dwelling architecture, I'm not talking about caves, we do have caves and we are going to talk about it next time, but architecture as such, built constructions where people used to live, it dates back to the 5th millennia BC. And I'm going to show you just a little. Now, there are round ones and square ones. These are the round ones, and you can see the foundation, the base of these dwelling places. They were houses, basically, but not in the same sense as we have houses today, of course, where people lived. You can kind of imagine what they looked like, but not fully reconstruct it. It's not quite possible. Apart from this very, very kind of ancient civilization, these things we are going to discuss at the next session, which will be solely dedicated to this ancient art, to the ancient Georgian art. And I did not want to show you this item from antiquity because I wanted to keep you as a nice surprise, but I decided to bring some kind of spoiler, a little spoiler. This is a necklace called necklace turtle, because you can see there are little teeny tiny turtles here with very, very fine mastery, very fine skill. It's made of gold, and it was found in the grave of a rich lady in Colchis, and it dates back to the 1st millennia, to the 5th century. And we are going to talk about this too. However, apart from this ancient civilization, the largest and probably the most and best studied part of Georgian history is Georgian church architecture. Well, the reason for it may be because of our Christian heritage and Christian legacy. We somehow identify our identity with Christianity, Christian culture. So if we have guests arriving to Georgia, we usually, automatically take them to see around these beautiful churches, and that's what it means being Georgian for us. That's Georgia. However, then we shall see later that that's not the only thing in Georgia, of course, but that's probably the largest part of our legacy. Now I'm going to show you this church because we probably should think that Byzantine masters were the first ones who taught Georgians how to build the places of worship, because it was all new to them when Georgia became Christian. However, if you look at this church here, it does not really look very Byzantine, does it? It's obviously different and quite unique. Well, one thing I can expect you to think suddenly at the first glimpse is that many foreigners, especially my colleagues, often tell me that it looks very Armenian. Well, it may look similar, but when we go to this session, when we discuss architecture, I'm going to show you that there are very, very serious differences which make them both unique, different, and special. So there are differences. Georgian architecture is not Armenian, and Armenian architecture is certainly not Georgian. Now, Georgian architecture itself divides into 4 stages of development. Well, I'm saying architecture, and then I'll tell you, of course, and I also mean mural paintings and sculpture, which it includes. The first stage of its development is the early Georgian church art. Now we can see the example here at Anisioni. You can see how almost finished and monumental, and everything is in order when you look at it. It's like it's made diligently. Shapes are finely carved. Everything is put in order. This is the first stage when the Georgian architecture flourished. The next stage is And this actually lasts from the 4th century to the 8th century. The next one, which is from 9th to the 9th and the 10th centuries, but it kind of begins in the end of the 8th century too, is this transitional period. This is the church which I like very, very much. I don't want it to be transparent. This is called Nuga Sakdari, and it's actually located in Turkey today, in present times, and I have been there myself, and it's my great love. I really fell in love with this little teeny tiny church. Even the name Nuga Sakdari means tiny church. You can see here there is almost nothing in order. In this transitional period, what architects do is to seek new shapes and new forms. And meanwhile, there may be lots of strange things happening, very unusual. Like here, even the stonework is not almost kind of not properly done. But nevertheless, this, I can say that this is my favorite period in Georgian architecture, because it somehow bears very, very special and unique sense of dynamism and liveliness. It's almost everything can be chaotic, but nevertheless it's very dynamic, it's very moving. That's how I felt about it when I went there. Well, we have lots of churches like that in Georgia too, but unfortunately I couldn't find another interesting reproduction. Now the third stage is developed church architecture. You can see here some Tavisi. This is the time from the 11th century to the 13th, to kind of the end of the 13th century. This is a period in Georgian art history, not art, but in Georgian history, when Georgia was united, strong and powerful. And you can see how architecture reflects and mirrors that attitude. It's almost like it projects the sense of majesty, peace and glory. We shall talk more about this later. And there is the final stage, which is a later Georgian architecture, which many people believe that there is some kind of decline. Well, I wouldn't say directly decline, but there is some kind of tendency of repeating the old, what was happening before, but putting a lot more decorations, making it more decorative. Just a moment, I had put somewhere. Let's see this one. The bell tower of Ancisrati. Sorry. No, this is the bell tower of Nino Dzminda Church. This is also from that century. There are also Islamic influences here. There is a brick brought into use, and also this arch-like, not arch-like, but this kind of forms and shapes which come from the Islamic culture. But also this repetitive style entwined with decorative, kind of decorativism, let's say, that's kind of considered as a decline. Not entirely as a bad thing, but no, there is not really much for development and going further. However, in this period, in this final stage or later period of Georgian architecture, fortresses come into use a lot, and military buildings, castles. This is a time when secularization comes into Georgian culture a lot. Actually, I forgot to show you. I showed you this at Denisioni earlier, and I cannot not show you the mural painting of Denisioni. This is a fabulous, very, very beautiful fresco painting. We shall talk about this later too. So the later period of art history, of Georgian art, is characterized with more secularism, tendency towards secularization has grew stronger and stronger towards the 18th century and onwards. Artists became, well, art somehow almost turned away from the sacred space. Georgian artists began to go to Russia to study realistic art in the 19th century. Portraits of nobility became like a trend. It was very kind of fashionable and posh to have your portrait painted. However, the first modernist artist, as declared as a modernist artist, was Nico Pirosmani, who was not a liturgical painter. He was just an independent painter. He was self-taught. He was born in the end of the 19th century and died in 1918 at the age of 51. So Nico Pirosmani used to paint this everyday scenes from everyday life, but he never stopped having this religious sensibility which he acquired from looking at Georgian icons and frescoes. Even his paintings, now here you can see a religious theme, obviously. It is obviously a religious theme, because you can see this lamb, which is a kind of symbol of Easter. But however, nevertheless, he still wants to paint a lamb, and he still wants to paint things from everyday life. However, his images, even the images of his animals, and even the images which has nothing to do with religious content, let's say, even they have some kind of expression of icons. Even though he doesn't, they are not meant to be icons. It's just this sensibility which comes and shines through. Now, at the same time, about the same time, when Pirosmani died, a group of young painters went to Paris to study European art directly, not through Russia and not just the realistic painting, but to study modern European art. David Kakabadze was among them, in the group, and I do believe that he is an European Georgian artist, really. Is kind of very, very, in many ways. I'm going to show you the most iconic painting by him, which is called Imereti, My Mother. There is a lot of symbolism in this painting. I hope you can see it. Is it all right? Is it visible? I hope you can see it. There is a lot of symbolism going on in this painting. Mainly it's a symbolism of his motherhood, identifying it with his native land, which is Imereti, which is in western Georgia, and where he was born. So this association with motherhood, with his motherland, is very important. But this painting is also very important because it's a mixture of his identity as a Georgian man and him being an European artist. Obviously, this landscape is painted in a style of Cubist painters. So there is an obvious reference to Cubism. Can you see it? Is it all right? So David Kakabadze is Georgian painter as well as European, and he wanted to bring this experience from the West to his home country. Well, and I believe he did. So his sympathy for the West, as you see it, was not terribly appreciated by the Soviets, was not appreciated at all. And you can see what was even less appreciated by the Soviets. Can you see this whole painting, whole picture? I think it's a kind of his sense of humor speaking here too. He was commissioned to paint celebration of Lenin's, something about Lenin. Can you see where Lenin is? Somewhere at the foot of this huge, enormous mountain, which obviously is a reference what is greater and what has a very, very little, teeny tiny importance. Well, because of his attitude, David Gagabadze was not appreciated by Soviets, as I told you, and he did not have a happy life in Soviet Union. However, David Gagabadze is not the only European artist, let's say, in Georgia. We have lots and lots of other artists. And also, I just wanted to give you some kind of spoiler today, just to tell you how interesting Georgian art is. And if you stay with us in the future, we are going to discuss a lot more than I talked to you about today. There is going to be more even church art apart from architecture. Icons, mural paintings, manuscripts, enamel, embroidery, wood carving and goldsmiths. And also, we are going to talk about Georgian contemporary artists a lot. I am intending to bring some interesting guests from different universities of Georgia. And if you're happy and if you enjoyed staying with us, please do subscribe to our channel and follow us on YouTube. Bye for now. Thank you.